I would have to say the highlight of my career is a kind of composite thing. Composite in that command has been the thing that I've enjoyed doing most, and it's the thing probably that I do best. Certainly gave me more satisfaction than anything else. The opportunity to work with soldiers, the opportunity to develop soldiers, the opportunity to develop an organization, to utilize our NCO chain of command and develop them, and to make an organization good, right on up to the point where it's the best. And I had that opportunity on numerous occasions, Floyd.
An AFN special with Major General Charles C. Rogers, outgoing USAREUR Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. In the 1950s, General Rogers served in several artillery units in the U.S. and Europe. In 1968, he commanded an artillery battalion for the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. He later spent a great deal of time serving in USAREUR. In the 1970s, he commanded the 42nd Field Artillery Group, 7th Corps Artillery, and in 1978, General Rogers became Deputy Commander of 5th Corps. In July 1980, he was named USAREUR's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. Decorations awarded include the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Legion of Merit, and the Congressional Medal of Honor. General Rogers talks with AFN Specialist Estevan Vasquez about the command soldiers and many of the policies and problems affecting them.
General Rogers, in June of 1951, you joined the Army. Why?
Well, the war in Korea was going on at that time, and the draft was in effect. I came in because it was necessary. However, I would have come in if it were not necessary, simply because my father, throughout all of my formative years, spoke with such great pride of his having served his country in World War I. He spent 2 years in, was a mail clerk, didn't even leave the country. But for all of his life, he spoke so very positively and with such great pride in having served his country in the armed services. And he spoke so much about it that when I was in college, I was convinced that I wanted to come in to try some of that. If it's that kind of pride that you can get from serving your country, I wanted that pride.
During your military career, you've given a lot of yourself to the military. What has the military meant for you? What have you gotten from it?
The Army, a part of our country, has done so much for me in terms of giving me opportunities to show what I can do, giving me opportunities to grow professionally, personally. And what was left for me was to take the opportunities and move out on them with all of my ability and all of my tenacity and all that God has given me to work with here. The Army gave me the opportunity, and the Army has greatly honored me in the types of positions that I've had. I've been greatly privileged to have had numerous opportunities to have commanded our soldiers in peacetime and in war, and I know of no more striking privilege that anyone has than the opportunity of commanding our country's soldiers, and we've got some darn good ones.
Sir, as one of the many responsibilities of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel is the Equal Opportunity Program. How have things changed over the years? Is the Equal Opportunity Program working, and how are things different now than when you joined the Army?
Discrimination has been a fact of life in the Army as long as I've been in it, and I'm sure in our civilian society long before I came on the scene. Chances are it's going to exist to some degree for an indefinite period. Nevertheless, we have made great progress in dealing with the issue of discrimination. It's a profound problem, and has been a profound problem for many years, indeed throughout my career. When I came in the Army in '51, the units were segregated. In fact, I came to Germany at that time in a black battalion. It was a 155 Field Artillery Battalion. And we came over here, and as an all-black unit, we were located initially in Bavaria. And about 6 or 8 months after I'd been here, we integrated with some of the other all-white units that had come over here and experienced some of the problems that were incident to the integration. There was a widespread belief that the integration was going to result in an overall decrease in the efficiency of the unit. At least many people said that was the reason why they didn't want to integrate. There were some open issues of discrimination at that time because people would say, well, I can't help it. I was brought up that way, or I was brought up to believe this, or I was brought up to believe that. And those type things were accepted as a part of the way life was in the Army. Discrimination was overt. Issues in dealing with minorities differently than dealing with whites were overt. When did this first start to change? When did I see it perceptibly? Perhaps in the late 50s, early 60s, after President Truman's proclamation to integrate the services began to take effect, and commanders began to get on board with the idea, whether they liked it or not, and they began to make the idea and the philosophy of equal opportunity a real thing, when they began to treat the minorities about the same way they treated everybody else. When I was a young officer, they'd write on your efficiency report, so-and-so is a very good Negro officer. So you identified right in the beginning for the boards that you were a Negro officer, and Negro officers didn't historically get the same level efficiency reports as others did. I know. I grew up with that. But it's a tribute to our country and a tribute more to our military services, and I can speak for the Army, because we worked diligently, very conscientiously, to attenuate this issue of discrimination, to work hard to eliminate it to the highest degree feasible, and heaven knows we haven't eliminated it yet. But we've knocked down so many barriers, particularly the ones that dealt with what has been described as institutional racism. You couldn't get to the top because there were so many things along the way in terms of ladder steps that you couldn't do to get to the top. You couldn't, if you didn't go to the Command General Staff College at Leavenworth, for example, your probability of getting promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and subsequently commanding a battalion, non-existent. If you didn't command as a Lieutenant Colonel, probabilities of your getting selected to go to War College, non-existent. If you didn't go to the War College and command at the 06 level or full colonel level, the probability you're getting selected for general officer, non-existent. So why didn't you have a lot of black senior officers at that time, or other minority senior officers? Because the system discriminated institutionally at all those levels. Now, in the late 60s and the early 70s, heaven knows we didn't make the system perfect, but we started with great conviction to dealing with that system and knocking down those barriers and attenuating the others. And we have done that to a very high level right now, not to the point where it's perfect, because of course it isn't. But I did a survey about 3 years ago when I was Deputy Commanding General of 5th Corps. Sent it out to about 10,000 soldiers with the proper demographics so I could identify the soldiers as by grade, identify them by race, identify them by sex. And asked a couple of loaded questions in the survey. One of them was, do you feel that the Equal Opportunity Race Relations Program is working? And the answers that came back, let's take our minorities first, blacks, very, very high percentage of them say, yeah, it's working real well. And I asked questions, do you have an opportunity to get promoted or selected for higher schooling as quickly and as easily as others in your unit? The answer came back predominantly, yes. Do you think that your NCO really cares about you and your promotion, your career aspirations? Most of the answers said yes. Now these were blacks I'm talking about now. The whites, most of them of course would indicate that the situation was working pretty well as far as they were concerned. The two groups that indicated they were not satisfied that the Equal Opportunity Program was working exceptionally well for them or up to the level that it should were our Hispanic Americans and our females. Zeroing in on that concern, and it was a very legitimate one, the first year I was here as Desk Per Usurer, we developed the Usurer annual Equal Opportunity theme around those two issues, dealing with the issues and concerns of our Hispanics and dealing with the issues and concerns of our females, and doing that which was necessary to advance their personal self-images and their conviction that somebody cares, and that somebody cares to the extent that they're going to help me realize my aspirations in life. That's why we did that conference, and I think we made some progress there. And we aren't home free on that one yet either, as we are in the other areas. I would say, Floyd, that one of the big differences between the Equal Opportunity Program today and the Equal Opportunity Program of 10 years ago is that it was perceived by many majority people as being a program designed to help minorities. Of course, it was designed to help minorities, but it was also designed to help the majority. It was also designed to help women. It was also designed to help anyone who needed help in the equal opportunity race relations field. It is significant that today most of the complaints that we get in the equal opportunity field, or in the IG field for that matter, are not minority guys complaining. Most of them are majority. What does it mean? It means we've evolved from the stage where everybody thought the program was a program for minorities. They have seen that the program's working. So now everybody is taking advantage of the program, which is exactly what we want because it is a program for everybody.
What about other problems facing USERA? Sir, you've been here in the command for 14 years of your military career. In what areas have you seen USERA face problems and come through with the greatest progress?
In recent years, I would address two major problems that we've had that have been quite profound, and in those areas we've seen the greatest gains. Certainly in recent years in the area of family housing, in the area of improvement of troop facilities, in the area of some significant motor pools and motor parks and so forth, work areas in general, park areas where we've seen pictures of soldiers standing in the mud working on million-dollar tanks and so forth. We've seen pictures of soldiers sleeping 4 and 5 in a room that was designed for 2 people. We've seen pictures of soldiers living in the attics and living in the basements. We know that it exists. It still exists to some extent in USERA. I believe you know that.
Yes,
but
sir.
the extent to which it exists today is much less than it's been in any of my 32 years in the Army, and a good part of which has been in Europe, as you just said. And in the last 2, perhaps 3 years, the improvement in that area has been most pronounced. The Congress has been highly responsive to our needs here in USERA. Many people have talked about it and acknowledged we had problems in those areas, but their talk wasn't supported by appropriation of funds until within the last couple of 3 years. So we're seeing some major moves in that area which will impact positively on our soldier morale and family morale and our community morale. And the other area we've made perhaps the most progress in recent years in the drug and alcohol abuse area. I'm sure all of us know that drug and alcohol abuse is still a problem for us, a serious problem. The magnitude of it is much less than it was a few years ago. If we take as a benchmark the visit of the Codell English group here, fall of 1978, for example, in hard drugs, of our urine samples tested, 6.8% of them, almost 7% of them, were found to have hard drugs in them. 6.8% of our samples, almost 7%. The recent test that I saw and results of it, which was about a month and a half ago, reflected that only 1/4, 1/4 of 1% of those samples now show hard drugs. From about 7% 5 years ago down to 1/4 of 1%. Now that's progress. Additionally, the usage of other type drugs has decreased, the exception of hashish. Hashish has been hanging tight at about 20% for about 4 or 5 years as a result of our soldier personal opinion surveys that we've been conducting once a year. The soldiers have responded anonymously to use of drugs, availability of them, cost of them, and so forth. And soldiers for years had been reporting that, anonymously, that about 20% of them were using hashish products, marijuana, so forth, at least 3 or 4 times a week. We started testing urine samples for hashish in the fall of '82, I believe it was. We found that the percentages parallel just about what the soldiers were telling us, about 20% in the urine samples. On the other hand, since we've started doing that and also introduced a number of other tightened personnel policies to deal with the drug abuse situation and with the drug abuser and the drug pusher, we have found that the usage of marijuana is dropping. In the first quarter of this year, it was at 20% still, the old figure. Second quarter, it was down to 17%. The third quarter, it was down at 11.5%. And the last figures I saw were around 7%. So about 7% of our soldiers are using it. In other words, during this year alone, we've decreased, at least on the basis of our test, the numbers of people who are using hashish products 3 or 4 times a week. by about 67%. We're at 1/3, or less than 1/3 of what we were, say, a year ago at this time. Now, is the picture all bright? No, Floyd, it's not. We're making progress in those areas, of course. About a year or so ago, year and a half ago, every quarter, every 3 months, we were discharging administratively about a battalion of soldiers per quarter from USERA for administrative persons, for administrative reasons. Right now, we're administrative discharging somewhere around 1 company per quarter. In other words, we reduced dramatically the number by almost 1/5, the number of to about 1/5, the numbers, the people that we were discharging administratively. So we've made some major progress in the drug and alcohol abuse field. Parallel to my comments on drugs, I would like to mention alcohol. Whereas we've seen the dramatic decrease, apparently, in drug usage, at least from testing, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in the alcohol use at this time. So I would say, as far as soldier problems are concerned and command concerned, the issue of alcohol abuse ranks well above the issue of drug abuse at this time, but we're attacking both of them and making some success, I believe.
What about the negative aspects of urinalysis testing as far as morale is concerned?
In fact, I read an article in the letter to the editor the other day where someone addressed this, the dehumanizing effect of having to urinate in the bottle when someone is watching you especially, and I can appreciate that. And I understand how one must feel under the circumstances. Nevertheless, when you consider that it's possible for someone to have a friend or co-worker urinate in a bottle and turn it in, as opposed to your own urine being turned in when you have something positive in your system, that possibility is there. We want to close all the loopholes. We want to do what is right by our soldiers. We want our soldiers to know, and know with great certainty, that we are concerned about their best interests. And beating drug abuse is in their best interest. And if that requires some little embarrassment in such cases as that, I think we need to accept that as a part of a system designed to eradicate this very serious problem that we're facing with drugs.
Sir, tapping on your long experience in the military, what advice would you give to a career-minded soldier who wants to better themselves, to become more of a professional?
I'd start off with work diligently to become a good human being. That's point one. A good, honorable human being. Right with your fellow man, right with your God. That's the most important thing I could say to a person, regardless of what they're doing. Now, if you happen to be in the Army, career aspirations, then you got to become technically proficient in your business. If you're a tanker, you got to work to become the best cotton-picking tanker that ever came down the pike. If you're an artilleryman, you've got to work to be the best in your shop, best in your section. If you're a single man, you've got to get to know your communications equipment backwards and forward, to the extent that not only do you know it, but that your co-workers know that you know it, that your bosses can depend on you. So become technically proficient, great. Obviously, the need for being responsive to the orders of your leaders is going to be a step forward. I don't think leaders want people who are yes men all the time. On the other hand, they want people who know how to say, okay, Sergeant, or yes, sir, and go on out and do what they're told to do without a lot of talk back. Probably as many guys get in trouble or irritate their bosses and thereby don't get the ratings that they should have gotten by talking back, not in a crude manner, but in a manner that just reflects that you're resisting everything instead of trying to make the thing work. You see, one of these days, some of these young guys are going to be bosses, and they're going to expect people to follow their leadership. So now we owe it to our leaders to follow them as long as what we're being told is right and proper and consistent with the mission and so forth.
As you leave your position as Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel in USERA, is there a few words that you would have for the soldiers who will remain in the command?
What would I say to the soldiers of the command? That's an opportunity I take gladly, because the soldiers of the command are the people I love most. I've taken great pleasure in my 32 years or so of service in working with you, helping you to develop yourselves and your talents, watching you grow professionally and watching you grow as young men and young women. And I've seen your difficulties, I've seen your success, and I'm very proud of you. Today we've got the very best Army that I've seen in the 32 years that I've been in. The very best soldiers. You hear a lot of talk about the draft soldier. I saw those too. Today's soldier is much more disciplined, much better educated, much more teachable, much more leadable. The soldiers that I see out there today who are young have aspirations and they have a vision, a dream of where they want to go. And they're pretty well convinced that their sergeant will help them get there. That's important. Sergeants. Years ago when I commanded the 7th Corps Artillery, we had one unit that did exceptionally well in everything. When the Corps commander, at that time, General George Blanchard, went out and asked the Sergeant Major, what is so good about this outfit? How do you do it so much better than everybody else in the Corps? And the Sergeant Major said, sir, in this outfit, the officers command, but the NCOs run things. And in my view, that's the way it is in a good unit, and that's the way it should be. You're never going to find anyone more strongly supportive of our NCO leadership than I. And the fact that it's high quality, responsive, sensitive, is evidenced by the fact that the soldiers, when they now have problems and concerns, instead of running up the chain of command to some senior person at the top, they talk to their squad leader. They talk to their platoon leader. They'll talk to their first sergeant. They use the chain of command. And as long as your outfit's working the way it should, that's the way you should do. Set a goal for yourself, work diligently to move toward it with the full understanding that your sergeant will help you get there, that he cares about you. Commanders are responsible for dealing with and responding to the total needs of our soldiers. Their physical needs, their educational needs, their emotional needs, and their religious needs. The total soldier, because we care about all of him or her, and we want them to have the environment and the forum on which they can work to reach their career aspirations and their life's aspirations. We are concerned about your morale. We are concerned about your well-being. We are concerned about your career and professional growth, as well as mental and emotional growth. The great pleasures of my life can mostly be summarized in the pleasures I've had incident to dealing with soldiers, units, communities, families. So as I approach the time when I must hang up my hat at the end of 32 years, I look back with great pleasure on those associations and the opportunities that they presented to me. To all of you there, may God bless you. Well, I do plan on retiring in the near future. When I retire, I intend to study for the ministry. I've known perhaps all of my life that one day I would go into the ministry, and now is a good time to do it. Whereas the Army has been the most important thing in my life up to this point, I'll always love the Army, but when I step off on another direction, I will give my full conviction and full commitment to that.